Not long ago, my son made a strange suggestion while eating cherry tomatoes. He wanted me to put them inside me. I feigned surprise and asked him why he would say such a thing. Even though I acted surprised, deep down, I feel there might be someone who would think I'm crazy for saying this. When I was young, women who were in their 30s and unmarried were often called old maids. Everyone around me was married, and the pressure to get married from home was intense. I was in my mid-30s, working at a company and living alone. I decided to get married after visiting the home of a close coworker. I was invited to a coworker's house for a gathering. We enjoyed delicious food and had a great time chatting and laughing. The coworker who had invited us home was a single father living with his son. His wife had left home when their child was young, he said. That day, his son looked at me with a pitiful gaze. I thought to myself as I looked into the child's eyes, I want to be a part of this child's family. It wasn't so much the desire to become a mother, but to become a family member. I started to look after that coworker. I didn't have great cooking skills, but I made various dishes and delivered them to him to give to his son. He was very grateful. He said he was more grateful that I was looking after his son than himself. I had never given birth, but I felt like I understood what he meant. That male coworker confessed his love to me. A man confessing his love to me with a shy and apologetic expression. I was waiting for his confession. Perhaps because I wanted to become a family with his son, whom I met at his house. The middle school student I first met became my family. That coworker became my husband. My parents were a little disappointed that I was marrying a single father, but considering my age, they allowed the marriage. I got a husband and a sturdy middle school son. When my husband and I came home from work, our son would have dinner ready and be waiting for us. Because he had lived alone with his dad, he was a good cook. He always stayed by my side, calling me Mom. When I was reading a book, he would sit next to me and read. And when I went for a walk, he would come along. I loved that child so much. That blissful life lasted only for 2 years. My husband passed away in a car accident while driving the company car, just 2 years after our marriage. There was a large compensation from the company, and my husband had taken out a lot of insurance. So I received a lot of money from the insurance company. I had enough money to live on without working for the rest of my life. After my husband passed away, my son seemed to be watching me for a while. He seemed to think that he could be alone at any time. Since I wasn't his birth mother and his father was gone, I told my son clearly, "You are my son. I decided to marry your father because of you. I wanted to be a family with you. I'm so grateful that you became a part of my family. So we're going to live as a family forever. You don't need to worry." Upon hearing my words, my son burst into tears. It seems my thoughts were true. He must have been wondering if he had to live apart from me. How could I abandon a child with eyes like a deer? The reason I decided to marry my husband was because of this child. My son grew up wonderfully. He studied hard and got into a prestigious university. I was so grateful. I was worried that my son might struggle with his studies and lose his way because he was growing up with a stepmother. Every time he brought home his report card, I felt relieved, and when he got into a prestigious university, I was overjoyed. As my son became a college student and spent less time at home, I naturally felt loneliness creeping in. I even resented my husband, who had passed away first. There were many temptations from male coworkers who knew that I was a widow since my husband was a coworker. There were many temptations from married men, single men, young and old. When an older married man thought lightly of me and asked me out on a date, I felt a great sense of guilt and came home and cried. I wanted to keep my son unaware of this suffering, but it was impossible to do so while living in the same house. When my son was a freshman in college, I was crying alone at home. I was crying out of sheer loneliness and the torment of many men's temptations. My son said he would be coming home late after drinking with his friends that day. I had been lying in bed, crying for a long time when I felt someone touching my face. I must have been crying without even realizing that my son had come home. I couldn't say anything to my son, who was asking me what was wrong. Despite my multiple promises to never show weakness to my son, it ended up happening. That day, my son stood by my side. He brought a wet towel and wiped my face, which was soaked with sweat and tears, and kept asking what happened. I tried not to say anything. I was afraid that once I started talking, my heart would break and I would confide in him every day. However, due to his continuous questioning, I found myself talking. I told him that I felt very lonely. I also told him that I feel guilty because of the temptation from the men around me. He suggested that if there are good men, I should meet them. I told him that he might not understand because he's still young. But those men are approaching me easily because I'm a widow, not because they like me. He seemed to understand my feelings, saying that he would feel bad rather than happy with such temptations. I had never been able to tell anyone about this, but it was a great comfort to me that my son, whom I thought was just a young child, listened to me and understood my feelings. I felt that he had matured a lot. From that day on, my son slept in my room with me. I slept in the bed, and he lay on the floor with a blanket. No matter how much I told him to go to his room and sleep comfortably, he slept on the floor in my room. I was very grateful. It was so nice to chat with my son before falling asleep at night. He waited for me to say everything I wanted to say, so I was able to talk freely about everything in my heart. On the days when I didn't talk much, my son talked to me. He talked about what happened at school, what happened with his friends, and so on. It felt like watching a movie while listening to his story. One day, I told my son to come up to the bed and sleep. He asked how he could do that, so I said, "You're still a baby in my eyes?" He laughed as if he couldn't believe it and climbed into the bed. Since that day, my son and I started sleeping in the same bed. And one day we naturally started talking about dating. He told me that he had never had a girlfriend. I asked how a college student could never have had a girlfriend, and he said he thought it was because he was too shy. I told him it made no sense for a tall, handsome, and kind-hearted male college student to have never had a girlfriend. My son told me he had thought of me as a mother, a friend, and a lover. So he said he wasn't lonely even though he didn't have a girlfriend. So I told him I felt the same way. I told him I no longer felt any emptiness in my heart because of him. These days, my colleagues at work sometimes ask me if something good happened to me, and I told them it's all thanks to him. But then, I made a mistake in my words. But you're at the peak of your youth. Isn't it hard? When I said this, he admitted that it was indeed hard. I encouraged him to build up his confidence and try to get a girlfriend. He asked what would happen to me then. Me? What does it have to do with me? I didn't understand what he meant. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. Suddenly, he hugged me. Being held in his broad chest, I unknowingly shed tears. It seems I had been very lonely all this time. I guess I was also a person and a woman. That night, I allowed everything he did. He didn't let go of me all night. I wished time could stop all night. I couldn't sleep a wink at night and went to work the next day, but I didn't feel tired at all. I worked energetically at the company and went home after work. When I arrived home, my son hadn't returned from school yet. I did my best to prepare dinner. While I was preparing dinner, my son came home. We ate dinner together and watched TV before going to bed. He asked if he could consider me as his girlfriend, and I nodded. I could only smile dumbly at the touch of my son's hand pinching my cheek, saying my blushing face was cute. Afterwards, we lived like a married couple. My son graduated from college with excellent grades and got a good job. I always told him that I would always be by his side, so he should find a good woman and get married. But every time he just shook his head and laughed. My son approached me regardless of time and place. When he approached me, while we were walking in the park at night, I pretended to be surprised and acted cute. But deep down I was happy. I always waited for him to approach me when we walked in the park together. So I deliberately held my pee and sat down by the roadside to pee. When we walked in the park, I knew that when he saw me doing this, he couldn't resist and approached me. My son seems to get excited about nothing. He says that my laugh is sexy, that I look sexy even when I'm using the toilet, and that I look sexy when I pass gas and laugh shyly. I wait until he has done everything he wants to do, even on days when I'm very tired. Not long ago, my son made a strange suggestion while eating cherry tomatoes. He wanted me to put the cherry tomatoes inside me and then give them to him. I was shocked and asked him why he was saying such things. I acted cute and pretended to be shocked, but inside, I was thinking, that would be so fun. I gave in and did as he wanted, and he ate the cherry tomatoes deliciously and laughed at me.